No one that makes gear that I enjoy listening to lives and dies by measurements.
Yeah. Some people are doing reviews solely based on measurements and they're not even listening to the gear. And
my friends are like, dude, you spent $75 on wire. Have you lost your mind? And I'm like, yeah, probably. Tone equals fun. And for me, that's really it.
The Fidelity Exchange, pulling back the curtain on brands shaping high-end audio and more.
hey everyone, welcome to the Fidelity Exchange. I'm Drew Baird from Moon Audio, and today I'm really excited to be talking to Jeff Dorgay. Jeff is the founder of Tone Audio Magazine, which he started back in 2004 as an alternative voice in audio journalism. He also runs the Audiophile Apartment, Headphone Arts, and Heel and Toe magazine for automotive enthusiasts. But what makes Jeff Perspective unique is his journey from growing up in a 4-generation auto body shop to building his first HiFi system at 14 to becoming a fine art photographer with clients like Steve Jobs and Jerry Seinfeld, and then pivoting into audio journalism. Jeff, welcome to the Fidelity Exchange.
Hey, man, thanks for having me out here.
Yeah, man. So why don't you tell me a little bit about your story? How did all of those things culminate?
Well, it was a crazy world, growing up in my dad's auto body shop. Summer times were spent wet sanding lacquer on Corvettes because my dad did a lot of Corvette work, and he actually by day he worked for Cadillac. So I grew up in Wisconsin, Milwaukee, Wisconsin. Real be American, buy American family. I was a complete failure as a son because I only owned one American car in my life. So it was that. But really, all the credit goes to my neighbor across the street, who was about 5 years older than I was, and so he was in college when I was in high school, and he was a DJ at University of Wisconsin Parkside. So he always had this killer hi-fi system across the street, and he was kind enough to let that goofy young kid hang out with him and listen to records all the time. So, I just, he's the guy. I always tease him. I said that if Stereophile from 2073 sends the Terminator back in time to take Tone out, they're going to take him out because he was the guy that got me, excited about hi-fi. But and I mean, again, back in the day, I my first job was at McDonald's. My boss was like Mr. Krabs at the Krusty Krab, and so
Very nice.
making $1.40 an hour wasn't quite enough cash to buy a stereo.
Yeah.
But I took electronics class in high school, 4 years, and best friend of mine and we built a really dreadful sounding tube amp from the RCA tube manual schematic, and EL34 amp, as noisy as heck. But hey, it was my first hi-fi, and it was cool. And I think right about 16, I bought a Technics 1200 with work money, extra money, doing extra mowing lawns. I mean, I know it's that kind of corny classic story, but yeah, that was it. And to this day, I still have a 1200. So it's yeah. So I spent most of my time, always. I've either had a camera or a spray gun or a record in my hand. I mean, I think about 15. I started reading. I read the whole Time Life photography series, and I thought it would be really cool to take pictures. And again, I bought a Nikon with. I went to the camera store and bought a Nikon FTN, which I thought was so cool because the Nikon rep was there, and he was pounding a nail in a 2x4 with a Nikon body, and I thought, that's so awesome. That's the camera for me. So, but once I put that camera in my hand, I pretty much never put it down. I mean, I knew that was what I wanted to do, and did crazy stuff, shot weddings for 6 years. Oh my God, I could write a whole book about that. I mean, that could be a whole Netflix series. It was so wacky. And one thing led to another. After college, started working in the advertising world, and really just jumped in. Didn't was too stupid to know any better, and right away managed to land some really good clients: Miller Brewing Company, Canon Copiers, Ryko, Evinrude Marine. I used to, zoom all over the place shooting boats for Evinrude. And I guess after that, got tired of the cold, moved to Scottsdale, stayed doing the same thing. Um, that was where I met my ex, who was an art director. And then we started working together as photographer, designer. At that time, probably my biggest client was U-Haul.
Yeah.
And they were right around, I think around 89, 90, 91-ish, somewhere in there. They were beta testing Photoshop for Adobe. And one of the guys said, "Hey, man, you got to see this." And he let me copy the discs, you know, and it was Photoshop version 0.8. And I just went, wow, this is the future. I mean, this is like the future of everything. And everybody thought I was nuts. So I had a gorgeous 86 Alpha Spider. I sold my Alpha for 15 grand, went down to the Apple store, got like, a Mac 2 CI with 12 meg of RAM and a 120 meg hard drive and a 13-inch monitor and a shitty scanner, a bad scanner, and a mediocre scanner, and a copy of Photoshop for 15 grand.
Right.
And, I was off. So crazy.
Yeah, very, very similar beginnings for me. I grew up in New York City, became a DJ in the 80s and 90s. I had two of the Technics 1200 MK2s, which were like the all-time turntables for DJs, and I used that gig to make money to buy more audio gear, and to just slowly build up my arsenal of stuff. Even earlier than that, the first system I ever had, my mom got for me from Sears. You remember that place?
Yes.
It was an all-in-one, tuner, tape deck, no turntable on it, just tapes, tuner and whatnot, and that was my intro into audio before I became the DJ. But growing up in New York City at the height of the beginning and the height of rap music and whatnot, really changed my whole mind in terms of the direction of music. I was originally listening to like Led Zeppelin, and all of a sudden I heard Grandmaster Flash, and bam, my head exploded and I got into DJing. Right, so I had those 1200s. I didn't have a $15,000 car. I had a yellow Toyota Corolla, and it was like safety yellow, and the head material came out, and I actually ended up painting the inside of the roof of the car safety yellow. So that was my automotive paint experience. No wet sanding, just a spray can.
Well, when I first started buying HiFi, seriously, I mean, in the late 70s, I was working for a Wisconsin, actually, it was a Midwest chain called Shock Electronics. And Shock was in Minneapolis. I think they were in about 6 or 7, 8 states. So I worked at the mall, as we all did back then.
Mm-hmm.
And the stereo store was the place I wanted to work. It was, so finally, after about a year, they caved in and gave me a job. But at that time, I had probably worked my way up to, I had a pair of ESS AMT 1 towers like you see here, and some Nakamichi gear like you see here. So I'm kind of reliving my youth having acquired these. But anyway, the aha moment for high-end audio was I was selling that gear, and a guy walked in our store, and he goes, "Man, you guys think you have great stuff." He goes, "This stuff's junk." He goes, "You need to go to this place down the street." And they're still there today, the Audio Emporium,
Right.
Just outside of Milwaukee, Wisconsin. He goes, "You need to go there." So after work, I went over to the Audio Emporium, and that's when that for me, that was the light bulb moment. That was, they had Magnapan, they had Acoustat, they had Audio Research, they had Conrad Johnson, they had Lynn turntables, they had Oracles, they had Riga. And so I got rid of all of this stuff, bought a pair of Magnapans, bought a Hafler amp and preamp as a kid, and bought a Riga P3.
Yeah.
And that's when it really went crazy.
Yeah.
you know.
Yeah,
So
funny you should mention the Nakamichi and your ESSs. So I still have my original Newmark mixer, and I picked up last year the MK7 Techniques 1200s for doing a little DJing. I just cleaned up all of my records from the 80s and 90s about 6 months ago, and now I just collected the 3 Sony ES pieces that I had during the time, which was a tape deck, a tuner, and then the first 5 carousel by ES line. I've just restored all of them, so it's a trip to see that you've purchased what you had when you were first starting out, and so have I. I mean, it's like nostalgia, right? I mean, it's not
yeah,
just
oh yeah.
I mean, it's not just about, having crazy $50,000 mono blocks. It's about thinking about where our beginnings came from, right? And that's why I bought all of this stuff, to just reflect back on how it all started.
Yeah, and you know what else? I'll tell you, one of the things too, that having some of the older gear, after the Magnapans, I bought a pair of Acoustat 2+2s, and I still have a pair of 2+2s. I mean, I have a number of components that were along the way on the journey, and not only for all the reasons you mentioned are they fun to have,
Yeah.
but I think they're really good. It's good to go back. We tend to, um, I shouldn't say we all do, but we can have the you can kind of over romanticize what the past was.
Mm-hmm.
And so by having these things here, I can always go back and go, okay, this is what things sounded like in 1981. This
Yep.
is what things sounded like
Yep.
in 1990. We've done a number of reviews where, I don't know, a couple of years ago with the Riga P3, because I like the 1200. I've had a Riga P3 pretty much for the last 40 years.
Yeah.
And we ended up, when we did the P3 review, I found an old P3 on eBay from 1980. And I know the guys at Riga pretty well, and we traced the serial number, and they were like, "Oh yeah, was made in like May of 80." So it was cool to compare and contrast the progress that they've
Yeah.
made.
Yeah.
I mean, when JBL, what was it, maybe 10 years ago, when they came out with the Classic 100,
Mm-hmm.
I had L100. I mean, up until about 2 years ago, I gave my L100s to the guy that works on my BMWs because he always wanted a pair. But, I went out and, directly side by side compared the old to the new. So it was easy to really make a call and say, okay, this is what they've improved. This
Yeah.
is,
Yeah.
this is the progress that's been made. So I always find that part of the journey really intriguing,
Yeah.
to kind of to keep it in perspective, because we live in that internet world where it's kind of yelly screamy now, and everybody's making, is this the beginning, is this the end,
Yeah.
and I think it's a calmer thing than
Yeah.
that.
And what's really interesting is I'm going back to the late 90s, and I'm buying a bunch of gear from them. I bought some Camelot Technologies, Sonic Frontiers, and some other stuff that I'm restoring. I'm hot rodding. I'm replacing with much better today quality precision resistors and capacitors, and I'm cleaning up the chassis, and I'm getting the chassis repowder coated and stuff like that. And what's interesting, really, what I found about the 90s is, that was sort of on the cusp, especially on the digital side of, they only had chips to do maybe 2496. High res was just sort of in its infancies, and where everybody had to really compete to make the sound better was after the chip, like in DACs and CD players. The analog output stages from those chips, that's where the magic happened, because everybody was using the same chips back then, right? And so you really see where people's engineering really came into fruition in terms of how to really improve the sound of their gear, right? And today, it's so different now. We're trying to get out as much product as possible. They're building them so fast. They're not hand-built anymore. Still, some companies are hand-building stuff, but so much of stuff is being automated and built fast, and they really don't think about, these important circuit designs designs as much as just trying to get as much equipment out into the universe as possible, right? So I'm going back to all that gear and I'm studying that stuff because we actually just started a new electronics company called Saros Audio. And so I'm trying to grab some of that really cool designs that they did back in the late 90s to really make their gear shine when they didn't have the crazy FPGA chips today and stuff like that, right? So, I mean, the commonality that we're doing on each side of the country is amazing, that we're both doing the exact sort of same thing in some ways. And what's really fun about your magazine is I see you doing reviews of vintage equipment, right? It's not just about new
We
equipment.
always have. We've always done.
Love it.
We have done the vintage column since day one, and again for two reasons. One, for the guys like you and me that were back there
Yep.
to kind of look back and go, "Wow, that was cool. I had one of those." But also, I see the vintage column as being important because I think people that are new to high end audio
Yeah.
may not know that some of these companies go back 40, 50, 60, 70. I mean, Luxman is celebrating their 100th anniversary this next year, or right now. I can't remember exactly, but it's, 100 years. So I think too, what that does for a potential enthusiast or customer is to know that these products do have a lot of history.
Yeah.
So, I think I see it as having two, really important. But for me, seriously, I just love the old stuff. I mean, it's just fun to, again, it's just always fun to look back on the journey.
Yeah. And amazingly enough, some of this vintage equipment can actually compete with some of this stuff today. I mean, legitly. When I get done with some of these pieces, I'll have to send you a piece and you can do an article on it.
You bet. Happy to do it.
So I think
Yeah.
you've got a funny story about Kimber Cable, and your friend said you were crazy. What was that story?
Oh, yeah, yeah. Well, back that same dealer, when I had the Magnapans, I brought the Magnapans home, and then I was back at the HiFi store a couple of weeks later, and Kimber Cable had, at least to our town, had just arrived, and they had the original black and brown Kimber speaker cable, and I can't remember the number. But, they were like, yeah, this stuff's $2 a foot, and three if we put banana plugs on it. And I was like, wow,
That's
75
expensive.
bucks for wire? For wire. That's crazy talk. Like SpongeBob says, that's crazy talk, Patrick. And I'm like, yeah, I'll buy it. And I brought it home and it sounded better. And because I was using Monster Cable back then, that was only $1 a foot.
Yeah.
And my friends are like, dude, you spent $75 on wire. Have you lost your mind? And I'm like, yeah, probably. And at that point in my hi-fi journey, I was driving the crappiest orange 74 Honda Civic ever. I mean, it was so scary. Girls wouldn't go out with me because my car was so scary. And I was like, no, really, you should come over to my house and see my stereo. And they're like, oh, yeah, right, sure. But I'll tell you, the couple that braved the journey, they're like, oh, wow, you're just some guy that really likes music. I'm like, uh-huh. But I did have a cool motorcycle back at the time. So, yeah, I mean, it's always been, I mean, hi-fi has just always been a real obsession. I mean, just since, and again, I think you and I were chatting about this on the phone the other day. Um, it was never, at least for me, it was never gear for gear's sake. It was
Right.
always like, hey, I want to get better sound. I want to hear more sound. I want that hi-fi system to reveal more music.
Yeah.
And that's really what the quest has always been.
Yeah. And you've written, I see here, 16 magazines.
Yeah, well, part of the weirdness that happened when I went from advertising photography to doing fine art photography, which was all automobile oriented for a while there, like 90, I'm gonna say 97 to 2002. I was the only fine artist in the world that actually had a licensing agreement with Porsche to do limited numbered edition prints of their cars. I got right in on the high performance digital printing world, and I partnered with the people at Roland DGA, the keyboard guys,
Right.
and they were making some pretty and they still do. We're making some pretty amazing large format printers that could actually print a real wide gamut of color. And being in Scottsdale at that point in my life, I'd always gone to the Barrett Jackson car auction every year.
Very cool.
And, I would see these guys that were automotive fine artists, and most of them were their idea of automotive fine art was car in barn, car in field rusting away, bunch of muscle cars at drive-in, or my favorite, almost naked blonde girl bent over front or back of red Porsche or red Ferrari.
Right.
So, I wanted to do something that was more Andy Warhol-ish.
Yeah.
That's
Yeah.
I would say, the pop art stuff, you being from New York, that was always the stuff that really turned me on.
Yeah.
So again, jumped in, started doing it, and that was, that led me down another crazy path. And one of Roland actually had used a bunch of my images at the big Photokina show in, I think it's in Berlin. I know it's in Germany. I think it's in Berlin. It's been so long since I've been in that world.
Mm-hmm.
And I got approached by, it was called Digital Output Magazine. They wanted to do a story on what I was doing. So they did a story. The editors, after talking to me, said, "Hey, you were into digital from day one. We lost our guy that used to review digital cameras. How would you like to write reviews for us?" And you know, I said, "Yeah, I'll try it." I
Mm-hmm.
mean, I took 3 semesters of news writing in college as electives, and I thought, "Oh, I'll never use this." And but hey, so I said, "Give it a try. If you like it, pay me. If you hate it, hey, we gave it a shot." They were thrilled. Um, Within about 3 months, they had me doing 2 columns. And then my editor, Mike McEnany, who's still out in the photo space, he was freelancing for 2 other magazines as editors. He's like, "Hey, will you come over here and write for me over here?" And he introduced me to a couple more people, and it just kind of snowballed. And before I knew it, I was writing for CNET. I was writing for Rob Report. I was writing a little bit for DuPont Registry and a bunch of trade journals.
Yeah.
A bunch of photo. I did stuff for. It was called Studio Photography and Design. It was mostly wedding photography, but it worked because I shot weddings. So just like with HiFi, if you're back then, if you use a camera in a studio, you have different requirements than somebody that's shooting weddings or shooting sports or doing fine art. Everybody's got a different requirement.
Yeah.
So yeah, it was kind of a cool thing. And again, that was when the light bulb went off. And did you ever watch that show, Pinky and the Brain?
I don't think so.
It's 2 mice, and the show starts out every week, and the guy goes, the Pinky, the dumb one, says, "Well, Brain, what are we going to do today?" And he goes,
Oh,
"Same thing we do every day, take over the world."
that's right.
And
Yeah.
my ex and I are laying in bed staring at the ceiling one morning, and she goes, "Well, Brain, what are we going to do today?" And I said, "You know what?" I said, "Let's do our own magazine." I said, "You and I have been making people look good for years and years and years."
Yeah.
I said, "We could do this."
Yeah.
And so originally, believe it or not, Tone was going to be a photography magazine because I had all those connections in photo world. I thought, oh, getting advertisers in a photo magazine, slam dunk. But nobody, ironically, around 2002, 2003, nobody got the concept of doing a PDF magazine.
Yeah. Yeah.
So we, at the back of Tone, we did 1 page of audio of hi-fi gear
Uh-huh.
just for laughs. And then, now you've seen Spinal Tap,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Okay, where they talk about that bit about being the originals, and then these other guys were the originals, and they were the new originals.
That's right.
What's the point?
Yep. Yep.
There was a magazine in Australia called Tone. So we didn't want to start something, so we became Tone Photo, and then we produced Tone Photo and Tone Audio because at the time, one of the 16 magazines I was writing for was the Absolute Sound,
Mm-hmm.
and I thought, I want more access to cool stuff. I mean, all the props in the world to Robert Harley for giving me a shot and being kind enough to take me in. But I knew I was always going to be that guy reviewing $1,000 NAD integrated amps. And I wanted to do more than that because my hi-fi journey had progressed past that
Sure.
at that point in time.
Sure.
And so I was going to all the shows anyway. And, I started sniffing around and I asked a few people, I said, hey, if I went and did my own thing, would you support it?
Yeah.
And I was fortunate. I mean, the first guy that advertised in tone was Kevin Deal at Upscale Audio. And I had actually met Kevin at the Long Beach Grand Prix 5 years before. He was in my booth and bought art from
Yeah.
me.
He's really
You
big into
know,
Porsches, right?
yeah,
Yeah.
and Alphas too,
Yeah.
Porsches, Alphas, Ducatis, and I'm like, hey, you're that guy that I buy tubes from all the time, and so we were friends really for years before I started Tone, and Mark Shifter at who has Verify now, who used to be AV123. Mark, same thing. He's like, yeah, I'll sign up for this. And the third people were Conrad Johnson. I actually it launched at Rocky Mountain back in '04.
My favorite
And
show.
yeah,
I
me
miss it.
too. And that's where Tone started. And I
Yeah.
was wearing a Conrad Johnson t-shirt.
Mm.
And Lou Johnson walked up to me and said, hey man, nice shirt. And we got talking. And Lou Johnson's another person, Lou and Bill, are guys I have to give so much credit to because, Lou is saying, hey, he goes, I like what you're doing. He goes, but you need a real system. He said, you kind of got a Mr. Nobody system. And so I said, always being Bart Simpson, I said, hey man, why don't you send me a Act 2 preamp in a Premier 350? And he goes, you know what? That's what we're going to do. He goes, we're going to set you up, kid. He goes, you've been a CJ customer for a long time. So they sent me an Act 2 and a Premier 350. And he said, you can use it for a year. He said, when you're done, send it back or send me a check. And I think about 3 months in, I wrote him a check for the stuff. And so, again, there were these people along the way that just did so much to, really help me get a foothold
Yeah.
and get going.
Yeah. I think one of the things I really love about the Tone magazine is that it almost reminds me of like Rob Report, right? It's not like a magazine that's just, it looks like every other stereo review magazine, right? It's artsy and fartsy, and the images are really cool. It's a very different publication, and that's probably why I'm so drawn to it, because all the other stereo magazines sort of look the same. And no disrespect to any of them, I love them and read all of them, and I've got collections of these are all Absolute Sound magazines back here on the shelves,
Yeah,
and
I
I
still
save
have
them
I still
all.
have
And
the first issue of
yeah.
Absolute Sound.
Yeah, so I mean they're all great, but what's really cool about yours is it's so different, right? It's neat. It's not just about 50 billion different products in there. You scale it back, and it's more about the story and the visual. It's a very cool magazine. And I was going to say, you've got this concierge philosophy, not the Mr. Know-it-all, if you will, and you're trying to help people navigate the journey and get into audio. And that's very similar to what we do here at Moon Audio. It's not, and we talked about this story, and I'll say it again. When I was a kid growing up in New York City, and I'd want to go to these hi-fi shops, it was very put offish. Like I'd go to Sound a Singer and they wouldn't even let me in the door because they were like, well, this kid doesn't have a credit card. And, it's almost like leave your credit card at the door, not knowing I've got this big wad of cash in my pants from DJing. And I could have bought just about, not everything in the store, but I could have laid down some cash for stuff. And so I love the goal that, I never ask anybody what they want to spend. That's like one of the last questions. It's all about the story of, what kind of music they listen to and what are they trying to solve. My wife calls me an audio psychologist. Here, lay on my couch. Tell me your audio woes. Where can we go? And that's sort of the philosophy I see in your magazine.
Very much so. I couldn't agree with you more because I think what a lot of people lose track of, especially, when you review hi-fi gear for a long time and you get to that point where pretty much anybody will send you anything, it's kind of easy to lose your way and forget about that person and forget about where you started
Yeah.
because I think we all started with, or most of us, really started with pretty modest systems and built it up. And
Right.
it's kind of a point of contention with the audience sometimes where, you review a $30,000 DAC or a $50,000 pair of speakers or something. And a lot of times they get kind of cranky pants, but sometimes they don't understand. I don't think a lot of people wake up and go, yeah, I'm going to go buy a DCS Vivaldi today. No, it doesn't work.
Yeah.
Usually does not work
Yep.
that way. You started out way, way, way down here with a used Oppo,
Yep.
and then you got this, and
That's
then you
right.
got this, and then you got this, and
Yep.
you're like, hey, I'm ready to trade up one more time.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so it's so, and again, that's why we do budget gear. That's why we have a column called 1095, and it used to be 995, but inflation. And before that, we called it budget gear. But then we found out that certain cultures saw the word budget as offensive. So we changed it to, again, it's another Spinal Tap moment. We changed budget gear to value proposition. Other people in other cultures saw that as offensive. So that's when we went to 995 and concentrated on gear that was less than $1,000.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so, because I mean, there's a lot of, I mean, really and truly, for again, for all the complaints that are out there on the internet, I mean, wouldn't you agree? I think there's more great entry level gear now, really, than there ever has
True.
been.
True that. And it's interesting. I'm seeing a lot of this at shows now. Companies, some companies, instead of doing that, $3 million room, they're doing some lesser expensive rooms. Like, I've seen like Past Labs. They took 1 year. They're using like a monster cable power conditioner. They're using one of their least expensive integrateds, the XA25 integrated. They're using some Golden Sound speakers, right? And just some kind of transport, like a record player that Kent from Past Labs has, and he's got like, I think, an Oppo player. He had an Oppo CD player there, and they were really pushing, build this less expensive stereo and have maybe one key component like they're integrated or something to build everything around. And I'm seeing a lot of people doing that at the shows now, especially like at the Florida Audio Show. There have been a couple of really cool low budget rooms, so that's a cool point.
Speaking of the Florida show, if I can have a second
Yeah.
of shameless self promotion, um, they've been kind enough to give me a room this year. We're gonna do a series. I'm gonna try and do it two or maybe three times a day if I can. We're going to talk about putting together a budget system.
Very
We're
cool.
going to have a system that's about 1,000. It originally was going to be 1,000. Now I think with tariffs and et cetera, it's probably going to be $1,200 to $1,500, and then we're going to do a system for about $5,000 to $6,000.
Very
And
cool.
the nice folks at TMR Audio are going to provide. They're going to provide the gear for the $6,000 system. Verify is going to do the system for $1,200. And and again, I think one of the things again that people out there in the audience don't always understand with hi-fi, especially in reference to relatively expensive gear, is that I think it's like anything, whether it's cars, cameras, watches, food, travel, you name it. Um, you don't really know how far you're going to get into it
Yeah.
until you get into it.
Yeah. Yeah.
You might buy that $5,000 system, and you know what? That might suit your needs. I mean, you looking for vintage gear, how many times have you run across that person that goes, yeah, my dad had these JBL L100s and this Pioneer receiver for like 40 years.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that may be all the further you get. Or
Yeah.
you might be somebody like you or me that goes, man, this is the coolest thing in the whole world. I'm going to spend all my time and all my money. And one of my favorite stories like that is the late Dieter Burmester was a good friend of mine. Dieter was one of the kindest people in high-end audio. He was always awesome to me. I always enjoyed hanging out with him at the Munich show and stuff. And he told me a story once. He had a customer that always wanted him to visit his home. And he said, I don't normally do that kind of thing, but he said this guy was very insistent. And he said, this man was a janitor in Berlin. And he goes, janitors in Berlin make pretty good money. But he said, anyway, he said he lived above a shop. He said, I met him at his place. We walked up the stairs to his place. And he said it was this giant loft apartment. And he said, three walls, floor to ceiling, were all opera records
Oh,
And
wow.
he said, this guy had been upgrading his Burmester gear since the day I started. He had all of our top gear. He said he probably had about a $400,000 Burmester system. And he said, this guy told him, he said, all I do is work to buy records and buy Burmester and go to the opera. He
Yeah.
said, that's my whole life. He said, I come home from work, I take a shower, I eat a modest dinner, and I listen to opera until I fall asleep.
Mm,
So, and back to your point
yeah.
about the hi-fi store being not so nice to you,
Yeah.
you just don't know who that guy's going to be and what he's going to look, or he or she.
Yep.
You don't know what they're going to look
Yeah.
like.
Yeah, that's the kind of guy I want to go visit. That's really, really cool. And talking about, let's talk about physical media now. I mean, I've gone down a rabbit hole lately of really getting back into physical media. I've done the streaming thing. Streaming is almost turned into background music for me. I just put on streaming while I'm working or when I'm doing something when I'm working on my 1978 International Scout that I'm restoring, background music. But now I've
Which
gone
I
down.
have to see.
Yeah, I'll send you some
I'm
pictures.
gonna fly. I'm gonna
Yeah.
fly out to see that.
It's really cool.
It's
It's really cool. I'm going down the rabbit hole of, obviously vinyl's been making its resurgence now. We keep calling it a resurgence, but I mean, vinyl really has been around now for a while. But now, I'm
it
getting
just
back
kind of
into.
went like this.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. It's like the stock market, right? And I'm getting
Yeah.
back now into cassette tapes, and I've got my Revox reel to reel back there. I can't afford the reel to reel albums, but I'm making my own tapes, off of recording out of a really expensive Cord Dave or a DCS into that thing with DSD and stuff, and making analog tapes. It's a blast. The resurgence is crazy now. I mean, you see it all over marketplace on Facebook. Everybody's selling tapes and records and 8-tracks. Oh my God, there's so many 8-tracks on there. I don't have an 8-track player. Do you have an 8-track player?
Oh yeah, I've got. Oh yeah.
It's crazy how we're doing this crazy boomerang and getting back into this stuff. I mean, before you know it, mini disc is going to be back. I've actually thought about buying maybe a mini disc player or a DAT machine or something. It's just fun. It's about finding all these different avenues to play in. It's like it's a crazy hobby. It's like restoring cars or collecting watches or collecting sneakers or all that stuff. Oh man, I can't wait to see what this is. Look at that.
Dude.
A
And it works.
Kai. Oh my God, that's great.
It records. I haven't made an 8-track mixtape yet, but every once in a while, I'll just plug in that Gino Vanelli 8-track and and to your earlier comment, yeah, I have a mini disc recorder too, and it's a while back I had an 89 BMW 325 and I bought from Japan and I shouldn't have sold it with it. I had a Nakamichi mini disc receiver in the dash that was so cool. And I made a bunch of mixtapes and, it was just totally fun. And you know what? That's another reason. I mean, truly, 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 the reason I started Tone, it wasn't to crush stereophile or anything like
right.
that. No, it's because somebody said to me once, they said, well, do you want to crush stereophile? And I'm like, no, I don't want to crush stereophile. I don't want stereophile to go away. I've been subscribing to stereophile since I was 14.
Yeah.
The industry needs to get bigger, not smaller. Okay.
Amen.
But I don't know where I was, but I was talking to, I was in a room with a guy, one of Apple's top marketing people. And he said, this is probably 10 years ago. And he said, you got to get your message down to 3 words. He said, if you had to sum up your thing in 3 words, what would it be? And I said, tone equals fun. And for me, that's really it. I wrote an editorial a number of years ago, and I said, if you're not having fun with this stuff, get rid of it.
Yeah.
Go buy a sailboat, go buy a motorcycle. Yeah. However, what I have learned in almost 25 years of doing this is that, and maybe you've seen this too, I think everybody gets their joy from a different aspect of this.
Yeah.
And so for those people that want to sit down and listen to 10 power chords and compare that, you know what? That's where they get their fun. Okay, so if that's the fun aspect of audio for you, that's perfectly okay. That's not my
Yeah,
aspect
yeah,
of fun.
yeah.
I'd rather get a colonoscopy than compare 10 power chords. But it's okay. And some people want the first thing. Some people are like Seinfeld is with cars. They want the first one and the last one. Some people are completist collectors. One of the guys that writes for me about music a little bit, my friend Tom, he's a Jimi Hendrix collector. He's like, dude, I have everything but the body. He goes, I've got a couple of his guitars. I mean, he's got a massive, massive investment in cool Jimi Hendrix stuff. So,
Wow.
it's like those guys that you are, again, I'm saying guys generically, and I don't mean to do that, but the people that are such completist collectors where they have, I mean, there was a guy once that wrote for me. I went over to his house and he had, I don't know, thousands of records. And he goes, yeah, these are my Beatle records. And I'm going, yeah, but they made 13, 14, 15, 16 albums. But, he had like 50 pressings of
Right,
everything.
right. Yeah,
And
yeah,
I mean, as one car guy to another, I look at physical media as kind of having a daily driver and the one the garage queen,
right, right.
so you have that special pressing
Yep.
that when you can just sit on the couch and dig it,
Yeah,
you
no
put
doubt.
that special pressing on. And if you're just hanging around, you play the okay one. But
Right, right.
that's me,
Yeah.
you know.
What was your first 8-track you ever owned? Can you remember that?
First Chicago album,
So,
Chicago Transit Authority, came on 2 8 tracks
yeah,
actually.
so mine was Meatloaf, Bat Out of Hell.
Nice. I like that. Do you remember the first record you bought?
Oh man, I'm sure it was Grandmaster Flash or something like that. I mean, that started everything. I mean, that was yeah. Oh, and then I had the Kiss album where they had their four faces. I
A
can't remember.
lie. I know which one you're talking
Yeah,
about.
yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah.
That was my first rock and roll one, and I'm sure Grandmaster Flash was my rap one probably.
I know I would say I'm positive the first hip hop record I bought was the first Run DMC record.
Very nice, very nice. I had
When I
all of
heard
them.
that,
Yeah,
I mean, I was living in
Hollis,
Wisconsin
Queens.
back then. Yeah, people. I watched an interview with Ice-T, who is also I'm a huge Ice-T
Yeah,
fan,
very
but
cool dude.
I was watching Ice-T and he goes because he in his book I think it's called The Ice Effect. He said, now you may have to cut this out. I don't know if this will be politically correct or not. But he goes, look, if you're white, he goes, you can't be down. He goes, you can come up to me and say, hey, Ice, I know I'm white and I can't be down, but can I still hang with you? He goes, and I'll say, yeah. And he said, but he goes, I have to give a special shout out to my white fans because he said, you probably got a lot of flack if you were listening to hip hop back in the day. And that was where I was. I mean, I was driving around. I was 87. I was driving around. I had a red Porsche 944 with a killer system in it. And I'd be like booming around in my 944. And my friends were just like, what is wrong with you? I was doing when I moved to Arizona, I started shooting for Rockford Fosgate. Remember
Mm-hmm.
them?
Yep. Oh yeah.
And so I had a Saab turbo with that big back deck, and I had two 15s on the back deck with a Sony CD player and a whole bunch of Rockford amps. And I was dating this woman that worked for Herman Miller. She was like a real suit. And I was like long hair. I had long hair down to my waist. And, I pulled up to her house listening I had just bought Straight Outta Compton.
Nice.
I
That is a
bought that the
phenomenal
day.
album. Phenomenal album.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I just bought Straight Outta Compton. I got out of work, went to the record store, bought Straight Outta Compton, and I went to her house to pick her up for dinner. And I pull in the drive and I'm like, boom, boom, boom. She
Oh
goes,
man.
oh, those boom boom cars are everywhere. I said, you mean like this? Needless to say, that relationship did not last. It's like, dude, we were having dinner with friends of hers, and she goes, I'm a jazz aficionado. And I said, what? I said, you don't even know who Miles Davis is. I said, Kenny G's not jazz, man.
Yeah.
So yeah, that relationship didn't work.
Let's talk about the other magazines that you guys are doing, not just the Tone Audio, but you've got some other cool magazines that you should tell people about.
don't talk about headphone arts because we're letting that go because I'm
Oh,
just not a headphone guy.
oh
But
man.
yeah, I'm just not a headphone
I
guy.
hear
It's
you.
just it's hours in the day. And again, no disrespect. There's some
Yeah, yeah.
great headphone stuff out
Oh
there,
yeah.
but
You got to pick your
I'm
poison.
fortunate
I
enough.
get it.
Well, I got a 24 by 36-foot room and big speakers.
Yeah, yeah,
I'm a big speaker in a big room guy,
yeah, yeah. I hear you.
so I don't really, I don't have enough expertise and I don't have enough seat
Sure.
time to speak intelligently about headphones to the headphone community.
Get it.
That's as honest as I can be.
Yep.
But Audiophile Apartment is kind of it's got its own little niche because we started off, oh God, this was years ago. I forgot. Mika, do you know Mika? I'm trying to remember. He's PR for. He used to be in car audio. I I think it's Shevelhoff, but I don't know how to pronounce his name. And I've known Mika forever. And he was the guy that we were at a show, and he goes, you should do something, for people like me in New York
Yeah.
that have a small
Yep.
apartment. And so 62% of our readership is rest of world
Yeah.
outside of the US.
Yeah.
And again, you go to London, you go to Tokyo,
Yeah. Oh yeah.
you go to Paris. People don't have these big McMansion
Yep. That's
houses
right.
by and large.
Yep.
And so we wanted to do some things. It was going to be its own magazine, but really it's just a section on the website and it's a column in the magazine. We always try to pay attention to smaller speakers, smaller gear, smaller form factor stuff. I mean, like Nagra and some of those things.
Yeah.
And so that's an important part. And the car thing just kind of happened organically. I mean, back in 2017, I mean, again, whenever we've done like a survey of what else are you into besides audio, it's always cars, motorcycles, cameras, watches, high-end furniture, liquor, travel, golf, and guns. And I'm not a gun guy, so we're probably never going to talk about guns. And golf, ugh,
Oh, it takes way too much time.
you know what?
Yeah.
My ex-father-in-law, who I never agreed with anything, he was from Brooklyn.
Yeah.
And he goes, oh my God. He goes, you spend all day chasing the ball. He goes, you start out with the ball. What's the point? I said, dude, I totally agree with you on that.
Yeah.
Or as Jerry Seinfeld's guy that takes care of his car said, he goes, yeah. He goes, I'm not much for stick and ball sports. So that's going to annoy everybody. I'm an F1 guy.
Yeah.
So, so anyway.
And now I see you're branching out into YouTube, which is just YouTube has become like the wild west of reviewers.
Oh my God.
I mean,
Yeah,
everybody.
I just got a haircut because somebody said the other day on YouTube, one of the comments was, you're as overweight as the components
my
you
God.
review,
Oh.
and you never have a proper haircut. And I'm like, oh my God, I'm 60 some years old and I still got some old guy giving me a hard time about getting my haircut.
Yeah,
Really?
Yeah. There's so much negativity on YouTube. It's a shame. I mean, there's like the one good thing about YouTube is it is in some ways good for audio because there is so much audio now on YouTube, right? Audio equipment and stuff like that. But the reviews have gotten out of control with, some people are doing reviews solely based on measurements and they're not even listening to the gear. And I'm just like, how can you say that piece sounds good, but you haven't even listened to it or you haven't even used it right and you're measuring something that doesn't matter? I mean, it's just like, come on, guys, relax. They're getting away from the passion, It's like
Right. Well, I mean, it's again, in my travels with Tone, I've managed to go all over the world. I haven't met everybody, but I think I've met a majority of the people that make some of the world's best gear that are really, acknowledged great designers. I mean, I got to spend time with Dave Wilson at Wilson Audio. I know Nelson Pass. I've been in Nagra. I mean, seriously, everybody that advertises in Tone, I've made it a point to, except for maybe two or three people. I mean, I haven't been to Luxman yet, but I've been to DCS multiple times. I've been to Riga. I've been to Sim Audio. I've been to, you name it.
Yeah.
And so I've talked to a lot of these people, and the one thing that they've all said is that measurements are a place to start. They're not only are measurements a place to start, but measurements are a place that once they've drawn the line in the sand on finalizing a product design, measurements are a way to assure product consistency.
Yeah.
But nobody, again, no one that makes gear that I enjoy listening to, now that's a very highly personal bias, but no one that makes gear that I enjoy listening to lives and dies by measurements.
Yeah.
I think too, one of the things that I find really kind of dismaying about what's going on YouTube is that there's so many people out there that just hate this stuff,
Yeah.
or they're mad because of what it costs. And I mean, again, as one car guy to another, the coolest review I ever got to do for Tone was when Aston Martin handed me the keys to a $400,000 DBS for a week to write about the stereo. Okay, that was so awesome. Now that was 15 years ago, 12 years ago.
Yeah.
But I can't afford an Aston Martin, but I'm not out on every Aston Martin forum going, hey, you guys are all idiots,
Right, exactly.
my blah, blah, blah is just as good as your Aston Martin. No, it isn't. They're all those little dudes on the F1 grid are wearing $500,000 watches. I don't think they suck because they have stuff I can't have. I'm like, hey, good for you.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so that's what I find dismaying is that it's like, why even waste the energy complaining about things you either can't have or you just don't want?
Yeah.
I have a buddy that's a wine guy. I mean, this guy drinks $600 bottles of wine like I drink Diet Coke. Okay. And I don't know anything about wine. So to me, I mean, I've had a glass of wine from a $600 bottle. I'm like,
tastes like wine.
yeah, would I spend money on that? No.
Yeah.
But that's his whole life.
That's right.
So it's like, and he goes, dude, do you think I'm crazy because I drink expensive wine? I said, dude, I have $100,000 DAC. You're just as crazy as I am.
Yeah.
You're just crazy about something else.
Yeah. We all have our own stick, and I mean that's the way it is. So I want to let everybody know where they can find your magazine. So the first one is tonepublications.com. And then heeltoemag.com. I want everybody to go check those out because, Tone is just a fantastic magazine. I love it. I read it every time it comes out, front to back. Love looking at the pictures. It's so cool.
One more place.
Yeah.
Tonepublications, 2.com.
Ah.
Tone's it's like our Nordstrom's in the mall.
Yeah.
Bigger photos, no blinking banners. So
I didn't even know about that one. I'll have to check that out.
Yeah, check that out.
Yeah.
It's recent, but we're putting we're trying to move more in that direction with less banners. We're trying to find a way to get more traction for our advertisers without all the blinky banners.
Yeah. So Jeff, I want to thank you so much for your time today, for sharing your journey. This has been awesome.
Thank you so much for having me. Yeah. And we have to talk cars more.
Oh, without a doubt.
We go forward.
Yeah, I'll send you some pictures of my 1998 M3 that had a Nakamichi system in it. I'll send you some pictures.
Nice.
I'll send you some pictures of the International Scout, which is it's got a restored ADS system in it with Boston Acoustic speakers. It's a blast. And for all you guys out there, if you're curious about any of the topics we've discussed today, the team at Moon Audio is always here to help you navigate your own journey. Thanks, Jeff, and we're going to see you next time.